Greetings everyone and welcome back to another video. This is one of those occasions where I single out a particular console, trait, or item for special consideration, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Fek'ihri Torment engine console. And believe it or not only is this meta-defining, it's also free to play and it's a mission reward. So there are lots of really great meta-defining items which are free to play, but they tend to come from reputations and fleets and things like that. So this is one of those items you can get by just running out and playing a mission. You could get it today. You could get done watching this video and go out and get it and start using it before dinner time. Whereas some of this other stuff, you may have to spend weeks leveling up your reputations or whatever. And just for reference, it comes from the mission Leap of Faith. What is this thing? What does it do? Why is it important? Why are we here talking about it? The Fek'ihri Torment engine has 3 lines. The first line is a Cat 1 increase to non-hazard damage over time. We're going to come back and unpack that in a moment. A Cat 1 increase to fire, radiation, plasma, and physical damage. And then finally, dealing non-hazard damage over time has a chance to proc fire damage as a damage over time for 5 seconds that ignores shields. Okay, so you have to think about each one of these lines as its own separate thing, its own independent thing that gets checked each time you do something or use something or have something equipped. The first line, increased non-hazard damage over time. What is a hazard so that we can identify non-hazards? You could go to the Stow Wiki. In MMO parlance, people say don't stand in the fire. This is the fire. You've created a fire. If enemies go into it, they will be damaged. Non-hazards means it's not a hazard. Damage over time is something you're almost certainly familiar with. It's an effect that does its damage over time, and it ticks periodically in order to do its damage. Now, there are quite a few damage over time effects which are associated with hazards, such as gravity well, for example, but there are plenty of damage over time effects that are not associated with hazards. So, if it's a damage over time effect that is not caused by a hazard, then it will get this increase from the first line. Let's go down to the next line. Increased fire, radiation, plasma, and physical damage. Well, fire is not the most popular damage type around, but radiation, plasma, and physical damage show up quite a bit, even incidentally. So this affects a great number of things. And because this is an independent line from the first one, it can buff things that are hazards and which are not damage over time. So if you have a radiation damage effect or a plasma damage effect, even if it is a hazard or even if it's only a one-time damage, it will still get this increase. And because they're independent, you can double dip. And I've actually independently verified this, at least for secondary deflectors, deteriorating ones anyway. If you have a non-hazard damage over time plasma damage, for example, or non-hazard damage over time physical damage, it will receive both of these Cat 1 boosts. So it's really like 2 boosts in one. And since it works at least for secondary deflectors, presumably the mechanics mean that it will work for all of the other things which are able to double dip, making this a significant Cat 1 boost for anything that meets both of those criteria, and a decent Cat 1 boost for anything that meets one but not the other. Now let's go ahead and talk about the third line, the proc. It's the same language as line number 1, non-hazard damage over time. So if you're using anything that's boosted by line number 1, it has a chance, a 10% chance, to proc an extra non-hazard damage over time, because the fire damage here is a non-hazard damage over time effect, which means hypothetically it can proc itself. I'm not going to give you an exhaustive list of everything in both of these categories because, one, I don't think a fully exhaustive list exists, and also that list may be incorrect now or in the future, or missing or obsolete. So, and it would be boring just to listen to me list a bunch of stuff off, but an example of one that has one but not the other would be Let It Go, which is an engineering ability. It's a pretty popular filler since it's a debuffer. It does cold damage. It's a damage over time effect. So it would receive the boost from the first line because it's a non-hazard dot, but it doesn't receive a boost from the second line because it's cold damage and it's not included in that one. You'll just have to check for yourself. If you're really worried about it, you can unslot the console, reslot it, and then see if the item in question changes in damage. on the tooltip. But why am I talking about it? So now we know what it does. We have some idea of what it affects. And I'm going to put a link in the description to a Stowe Builds article from user EPH, who goes in some detail over this. And like I said, it may not be up to date when you're watching this. It may not be completely comprehensive, but a lot of work went into it. And some of the information in this video came from that article, as well as just my own experience. So I would definitely recommend checking that out if you want a deeper dive. So who is using this? I said earlier it was meta-defining. It's meta-defining in two ways. The first way is actually meta-defining, especially for science ships. If you go to the Stowe Builds Discord, which I'll also have a link for that as well, and you look at the curated EPG guides, builds, you will see that they have this console slotted because, as I mentioned earlier, deteriorating secondary deflectors are able to double dip on both of these damage boosts, and EPG science type builds also tend to run a lot of abilities, effects, consoles, etc., which can trigger the proc on here and which benefit from the one or the other of these two boosts. They tend to run a lot of radiation damage, plasma damage, physical damage, etc. Temporal abilities tend to do physical damage. If you have temporal specialization as your primary or secondary, entropic rider, it can benefit from this as well. So there's a lot of things that line up with EPG and science builds, which can greatly take advantage of this. But even though meta builds aren't always using this for torpedoes or energy weapons or whatever, it's still a pretty good console for all those things, just not quite good enough to make the cut. And you'll have to decide for yourself when you look at your build, your abilities, whether you have enough stuff on your build that it makes sense to use this or not, because it does take up a tactical console slot. From personal experience, it's pretty good though, especially for a budget, free-to-play, whatever item, and especially for something you can just run out and grab from a mission reward. Now, the next thing I will say, the other way that it's meta-defining is in the meta-gaming, which is to say the process of shipbuilding, the process of figuring out what's good and what's not good. And what I mean by that is it helps to make the game more textured, more interesting. It's the kind of thing I really like to see in the game. So if a new console comes out or a new bridge officer ability, which is unlikely, but not impossible, or a new trait or whatever, and it has a non-hazard damage over time effect, or it has radiation, plasma, or physical, or fire, then we have to take this into consideration. And the more things you have like this, the more complex and rich the shipbuilding aspect of the game becomes, because you have all of these things that are able to interact with each other and proc off of each other and boost each other, that it makes for a much more engaging experience than just saying, well, I'm just going to put a bunch of damage boosts on my ship and then go out and hit spacebar a bunch of times. You can start to think about all of the layered interactions. Shipbuilding can be a lot like ogres. You know, it has layers, for example. So I really like this console a lot. Not only is it powerful enough to make its way into some meta builds, it's powerful enough to make it into casual builds for sure, and probably on a short list for a lot of other kinds of builds. It's easy to get, it's very accessible, so don't sleep on this one. Go out and get it, have some fun with it, and it's Fek'ihri themed, so if you don't, you know, the Cramp-Erie and Krampus are coming for you, so don't forget that. Thank you guys very much for watching. Take care of yourselves, as always, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.